Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of The Shadow Side with Safrianna. I am your host, Safrianna Luna, and today I'm here by myself. I wanted to ensure that I had the opportunity to sit down and talk about this topic that has been on my heart since last year, since 2025, and life has really gotten away from me. I feel like if you've been following along with my journey, you know I've been on a fun roller coaster here ride here recently, but this has been so important. I've literally had two special emails sitting in my inbox for months and months, if not more than a year, waiting to have the opportunity to talk about it. So I wanted, before Pride Month officially closes this year, to dive into this topic about the binary and who does the binary really serve? Because we are standing at an intersection of humanity right now where we are seeing just mass levels of control when it comes to gender and gender expression. And why? Like, what is the larger reason for this other than power and control? So I want to dive in today and really talk about this. So, I do want to make a little note as I'm recording live here that I have been having some issues with this microphone. Hopefully, we are going to be golden today. And the thing is, I won't really know until the other side. So, if you do happen to stumble across me live, feel free to let me know if we're having any audio issues. But let's go ahead and dive into this topic. Who does the binary really serve? Because, first of all, who decided that there were only two correct human expressions based on what we were born with in between our legs, right? That is really what it boils down to. And first out of the gate, trying to reduce it down to two based on physiotypes is going to fall radically short of the actual lived experience of humans. Who we have intersex humans. We have so many different ambiguous body configurations that can show up in the world that when we try to reduce humans down to two options, we erase more people. And that's just not it's not acceptable. So, who decided that there were only two, and where did this rigid binary come from? Who built it? Who does it protect? I think it's really worth naming that the binary as a strict enforced system is not an ancient universal truth. This is a construct, and a construct always serves a particular someone, a particular population. So the gender binary didn't come from just one place. It was largely a product of European colonialism. Surprise, surprise. Countries like Britain and Portugal forced Western ideas onto indigenous and racialized people around the world. Whereas before colonization, there were many cultures, especially across the global south, that had women and third gender and gender fluid people in leadership as healers, as big parts of their communities. And then we saw in the 18th and 19th centuries European scientists beginning to argue strict differences between male and female, and as a sign of civilization, that gender was a sign of civilization, that cultures where gender was fluid were considered primitive and inferior. So this became a topic of colonial domination, a tool of colonial domination. And that enforcement was active, it was often violent. British colonial rule criminalized different communities. For example, the Hijira community in India in 1871. And then we had two spirit traditions in North America erased through mission schools and through anti sodomy laws. Unfortunately, these erasures weren't actually useful or purposeful in healing or creating better conditions for people. They were part of how colonizers dismantled indigenous social structures and spiritual traditions. So there are still so many cultures in the world that really have an opportunity still to teach us a lot about gender, about expression, about individuality. But because of things like colonialism imperialism, etc., we continue to see this shutting down of, shrinking in, homogenization down to only one size fits all. So, don't mind me here, just clearing out some things in the chat. Um, there are words to describe six different gender identities beyond the male female binary in over 155 indigenous nations in North America alone. So there is such a breadth of expression that can exist in the world. So again, who does it actually serve when we try to make there be only two? Well, very traditional structures, very colonial, imperial based structures. So I don't really think I need to say much more there when it comes down to who is actually benefiting from the strictness of these roles. Because again, in so many indigenous societies, third gender people often held really important spiritual, religious, uh, etc. roles in their communities, right? Healers, spiritual workers, ceremonial leaders. This was not abnormal in any way, shape, or form. These other expressions, these other ways of being in the world were woven into how those communities understood humanity and divinity and what is sacred. So, what is the binary actually doing today? Well, it's telling men that they can't be soft, that they can't be emotional, that they can't be vulnerable. It tells women that their worth is tied to their body and how they look and what they produce with their body or give with their body. It tells anyone who does not fit in these dominant systems to make themselves smaller or invisible, because trans and non-binary people don't they don't threaten the binary by existing. They just make it impossible to pretend that the binary is the full answer. And that is what makes them a target. Because if I am trying to ensure that you are going to do what I say, I'm going to attempt to eliminate any options that say otherwise. So I just want to talk about some of the current statistics. Now, I'm recording this, it is June 2026. Recent statistics are sometimes hard to come by, especially when we're looking at the LGBTQIA two spirit plus community. Uh, so many of the statistics that we have are still um, at least a year old. And what's interesting in the trend right now is that as visibility becomes more of a thing, as there are solidarity groups coming together to love one another and be compassionate, I do think we're going to continue to see statistically higher populations of queer people in the world, not because there are more queer people in the world, but because there is more language available, more acceptance, more ability to be self expressed. Because while dominant society might be coming down harder than ever, socially and like in our actual communities and groups, I think there is more tolerance and language and acceptance than ever before. But you wouldn't think so to actually look out at what's happening right now. So, approximately 2.8 million people in the United States, according to the Williams Institute in 2025, 2.8 million people identify as trans in the US. So, that is roughly 1% of people, and that is people 13 and older. About 5% of adults under 30 identify as trans or non binary. And again, this is of our most recent statistic. So we are seeing more of our younger generations identifying as trans or non binary. And again, I want to emphasize this is not because of more radicalized views. One does not need to do anything but look at the legislation and such happening in the world right now to know it's not a trendy, fun thing that people decide to do. This is not a choice to realize that we don't fit in the binary. It's a reclamation of who we really are. And just for the record, trans and non binary does not necessarily equate to people who have had quote unquote surgeries or procedures or hormones or anything like that. Trans and non-binary people do not have to do those things in order to be trans or non-binary. So I just want to throw that out there too, because then people sometimes get on this myth of, and then we're giving out all of these surgeries to people who are, coming to school and getting surgery. There's so much misinformation. I feel like I could soapbox on just that for hours. But this is a small group, is what I want to really emphasize. Even if we take the highest percentage possible of being 5% of adults under 30 right now, and 1% roughly of the overall population. So somewhere between 1 and 5% of our population here in the United States identify as trans or non-binary. And how many laws do we have going into place to try to control this? This is such a small group of people. 2024 was the fifth year in a row that broke records for anti trans bills. There were 701 bills in 44 states, according to the Trans Legislation Tracker, and that was back in 2024. 2025 broke the record again. And in 2026, 43 states plus the federal level are still pushing anti trans legislation, targeting bathrooms, sports, schools, healthcare, legal IDs, and even the ability to perform. And some states are going back and removing gender markers that people changed years ago on their documentation, that they went through the legal procedures to get all of that done. And now that is being rolled back. And this is really detrimental in so many ways that, again, I could do a whole episode on just that. But it's not really helping anybody. It's not keeping anyone more safe when we have legislation like this. It increases the risk of harm. It increases the risk of people getting help from unregulated sources. It increases suicide risks. And gender affirming care is backed by every major medical group in the United States. That is over 1.3 million doctors that are agreeing on that, which, let me just go back, 2.8 million people in the US identified as trans in 2025, according to the research. 1.3 million doctors have affirmed that, yeah, this kind of care is actually beneficial, and it is backed by us and every major medical group. So that's pretty huge. And we have standards. We have standards for care that we have been doing since 1979, that have guidelines that represent the opinions of thousands of professionals. So a lot of the misinformation out there about trans or gender affirming care is really, really messy and very filled with myth and misinformation, because gender affirming care is something that cisgender people, if you're unfamiliar with that term, it just means that you agree with the gender you were assigned or the sex you were assigned at birth. Cisgender people are constantly getting gender affirming care, whether it is laser hair removal or hair implants, or literally going and getting some kind of hormonal balance of some kind because yours naturally are not serving you where they need to be biologically, right? We are constantly seeking quote unquote gender affirming care, and trans people are getting some of the similar forms of affirming care that cisgender people might be, and some different, that are based on standards that real doctors have put together. That is not something that can be willy-nilly done. There is no situation in which people are just rolling out there and getting unregulated drugs and surgeries to express themselves overnight. That's not how it happens. So we really need to understand that, because there's so much anti-trans legislation and misinformation going around, when doctors are saying this is medically necessary care that saves lives, being trans is not a disorder, a phase, or a choice. And we've known that since the DSM-5. Like we've removed gender identity aside from quote unquote the norm, as it's not a diagnosis anymore. Being trans is not automatically a mental health diagnosis. And that reframing, I think, is very important too, because most trans people, when they are able to step into living the life that's truly theirs and being expressed as who they really are and just showing up wearing what they want to wear and being who they want to be and being called the name that they want to be called, that might be different than what they were given at birth, they step into the happiest versions of themselves. Their mental health improves. So much of the mental health stuff comes from being constantly targeted and attacked and misunderstood simply because of their identity. 40% of trans and non binary young people seriously considered suicide in this past year. 40% of trans and non binary people, young people, seriously considered suicide in the past year. And that's according to the Trevor Project. That is a huge number. And 90% of LGBTQIA plus youth say that the recent laws and debates that they are seeing on main stages in the world right now are causing them extreme health, like worry, stress, and anxiety. So 90% of LGBTQIA plus youth are saying that what's going on in the world right now is impacting their stress and anxiety. And in some cases, anti trans laws have driven suicide attempts up by as much as 72%. That's a huge spike. So the stress, again, is not coming from being trans, it is coming from how trans people are being treated. If we could just love and respect people as they are, what would happen to our mental health? I really wonder, because so much of the stress and anxiety is literally just coming from the mistreatment. And that's like, it's right there in our faces. The answer is right there. We know the answer. And the answer is more love, more compassion, more acceptance. I wanted to share some quotes from these very kind souls who identify as trans or non binary. And, I want for those who might not understand the terms too. No, I just launched right into my soapbox today. But I personally identify as a demi woman and agender. I don't identify with the trans or non-binary label particularly, and that's part of the fun. Is most non-binary people are simply rejecting that the binary is the norm. The sort of male, female, masc, femme, man, woman, boy, girl, binary. They are rejecting that. They might be rejecting the binary outright. They might exist somewhere on the binary in some form and still reject the binary. They might be playing with the binary and what that actually looks like. A non binary person, every non binary person is going to have a different definition for non binary for themselves, is what I have found. But it is a queering of these gender norms and these rigid, this box or that box, you get one or the other. It's a rejection of that. And to be trans simply means that you do not agree with what your birth certificate put on it when you came out of your parent and came into the world, and they said, oh, you are this letter or that letter. Trans means that you're on the other side of that. Trans means like moving across to the other side of. Cis means on the same side of at its core. So moving to the other side of. Many trans people do identify with the opposite binary than they were assigned. Some trans people identify as non-binary. So there's no one size fits all with anything, especially not in the queer community. But at its core, transness means moving away from that assignment, and non-binary means doing something, being something that cannot be defined or limited to those binary checkboxes that society generally tries to push, because again, we can control more easily if there's only two options. So I wanted to share these quotes from two people who submitted them back when I knew I wanted to just have a chat about the binary, have a chat about the legislation that's happening in the world. So the first quote comes from Harmony. Nowadays, I feel mostly confident and assured in my identity and expression as a queer and non binary person. I have learned to better own who I am. Maybe the biggest challenge for me in context of this identity exploration has been cultivating healthy courage in my presentation, though it has also been the most rewarding along the way. What it means for me to be non binary is that I can be free by my own choice and autonomy to honor my authenticity, regardless of what the world around me says. Mostly, what I wish people understood and respected is simply that what unites us can be more important than what divides us. Let it be. And I loved all of these quotes from Harmony because they really express, I think, the core of what being non binary, loving a non binary person, looking at the binary to break it. Uh, it's really about our own choice and autonomy to honor our authenticity, regardless of what the world around us says. I think back to points in history where if you were a woman, you had to wear certain clothes. I mean, there are certainly cases in which this is still true today. But thinking about some of my older friends who have talked about having to wear skirts and stockings to work or to school, and what freedom it was to be able to wear pants, to be able to dress more comfortably in their own way, right? The binary, when it is rigidly applied, does not serve anybody because it doesn't allow for freedom. It doesn't allow for authenticity. It doesn't allow for self expression. And when we don't allow for those things, we are moving towards dictatorship. We're moving towards imperialism and colonialism and control and all of those power and control dynamics. Well, if you've met me, you know that that's what I'm here to really try to abolish. And then I wanted to read this quote from Len. I do not live in fear because I can't live in fear. No one can ever take away what we feel inside. No one can ever take away what's going on in our mind. No one can ever take away our essence of who we are. I take a step deeper and I look at the person who's trying to hurt me or my fellow human. I see fear, hatred, confusion, hurt, pain, grief from the person that wants to take away someone's happiness. Being non binary is so freeing. I can be extremely masculine. I can be extremely feminine. I can be so neutral. Non binary for me is being able to exist and live my life as a human. Our meat suits can and cannot define us. It just depends on how you really feel. And I love this reflection too, because the people and the systems that are trying to force a rigid binary are not systems that are loving and compassionate and humanitarian. They are systems that are trying to exploit us for our work, for our labor, for our voices, for our abilities, for our gifts, etc. It's not profitable for everybody to be unique, right? It's not. We need people to want the same things and to expect the same standards and to compete with one another in order to make a profit in the way that our dominant society does. So when we have people that are breaking these norms, that are coming out of their shells to express themselves in their own way, that are leaving the binary behind or playing in the binary without attachment to what those rigid standards are, we are opening up a whole new way of living, of life. And I love that both Harmony and Len really landed in the same truth from totally different paths, that sort of who you are lives inside of you, that nothing outside of you can reach or spoil or take away who you really are, and that the binary doesn't have a box for who you really are, and it was never supposed to, because there's way more than two options. Way more than two options. There's how many billions of people on the planet now? I think like 9, like billions of different expressions and ways of being. So, Let's talk a little bit about the shadow side. I mean, I've already addressed a lot of the shadow sides here, but in shadow work, we can't face in ourselves what we're pushing away, what we're rejecting. And so, about this anti-trans situation that we find ourselves in, where so many resources in our government are going to trying to slam trans people when it could be going to a bajillion other things. Again, I could soapbox for forever. But the people that are driving this legislation are not necessarily afraid of trans people specifically, though I think that there's a lot psychologically going on there. But I think that they're afraid of what trans and non binary existence proves, which is that there is more to the story than the rigid two boxes. Because, like, trans people don't exist. Transness isn't real. Like, they'll try to use these arguments. Yes, it is, because real people are out there living trans and non-binary lives. You can't erase their lived reality because you disagree with it, because it's there. It's factually right there. So, I think that that binary protects so much of colonialism and imperialism and patriarchy and white supremacy and all of those things, uh, because that's largely where it's stemming from and where it's being upheld. And as Len said, people attack what they fear. This is the shadow at the collective scale, is legislation coming together to try and control 1% to 5% of the population for existing, for literally existing, when we could actually be targeting criminals who are harming children, who are harming men and women, predominantly women, who we could do something about gun violence. We could do so many different things, but we are attacking this group because it is a scapegoat. The binary does not just harm trans people, it harms everyone that the binary doesn't hold, which is most of us in some way at some point. Men who were punished for having emotions when they were little boys, women and girls who were punished for being too much, for having too many emotions. You know, this heartbreak that I just feel when I think about how harmful the binary is to boys and girls and men and women and everybody else in between, because it's so rigid. It only serves rigidity and control. It only serves people who are building systems around it and need those systems to stay intact, which right now is largely Christian nationalism, which is a lot of what is running things behind the scenes right now. And that even that Christian nationalism, first off, I don't think Jesus cares what your gender or gender expression is. Jesus loves you for you. So the sort of Bible pushing of gender norms and women being servants in the home and servants of their husbands and God, it is so important to remember that that is human translation, and that the Bible has been translated over and over and over and over and over again to serve the leadership of its time. And so, if you, like me, have a complex relationship with Christianity and Jesus, and you still want to have a positive relationship with Jesus, for example, you can, as a queer person. You connect with Jesus on your own and not with the rigid definitions of what society has tried to manipulate the Bible to be. You can still have a spiritual relationship, even within a religious system that might be rigid. You can create your own relationship with spirit. And I know that that's like coming in hot from nowhere right now. But that's so much of what I'm here to do, is to help people step into their full spiritual expression. And our full spiritual expression comes through with our ability to be fully embodied as we are, to dress the way we love to dress, to wear our hair the way we love to wear our hair, to wear makeup if we like it, if we don't, to paint our nails if we like it, if we don't, to just be who we are, to show up embodied in a way that lights us up so we can stand in our mission. And that has spiritual components to it. Authenticity is a truly all encompassing thing, and spirituality is the realm of us that captures it all. The body, the mind, the emotion are all held by that spiritual dimension. And so, whatever your religious background, whatever your spirituality, if you are atheist, it does not matter. I think we could all do a little better if we stood in love as the universal truth and to know that we don't have to understand somebody's expression, their gender, to treat them like a person. And the shadow side of everything that's happening right now in this moment is not trans people or non-binary people. It is the shadow of the fear of what happens when we actually let people be, when we actually let people be who they are. So what can we actually do? Like I said, we can treat everyone like people. Even, and this is the hard part sometimes, I understand. For those of us who already get this, we're already on this page, we believe in love, we want to stand with people. And then we look to the people who are tearing trans people down, people who are trying to destroy people we love simply for being themselves. And it can be really hard to extend love to them too. And remember that they're people who are coming from fear and shame and often their own closeted experiences of who they really are that they don't feel like they can express because of that rigid binary. Because that rigid binary goes so beyond just man, woman, professional, homemaker, you know, caretaker versus breadwinner. Like the binary goes so far beyond these gender and rigid roles. They reduce us down to these flat caricatures. And very few people are actually going to authentically be lit up by that prescribed idea of what you're supposed to look like if you're a man or a woman. I know I contended against all of it in my my 20s and 30s, really questioning what it meant to me to be a woman and played around with thinking that I wanted to identify as non-binary. But then understanding that I identify mostly as a woman, but it's my own definition of woman. It's not society's definition of woman. It's not a church's definition of woman. It's my definition of woman. And that's what being the queer spirit guide is about me encouraging you to just look at who you really are. You can be straight, you can be gay, you can be cis, you can be trans, you can be non-binary. You can be questioning it all and not have an answer. You can slip and slide around the spectrum during your life because that's what we do as humans. But be you and question, who am I? What's authentic to me? What lights me up? And if you are a person that needs more education, you want to help but you don't know how. You want to get real information from real people doing real work and not cultural war talking points, then go check out things like the Trevor Project, Trans Lifeline, the National Center for Transgender Equality. Go look for organizations that are going to give you different talking points than the mainstream and do your own research. Get to know people. Expand your horizons. I think we can all benefit from this, even when we think we know everything. I am constantly learning new intersections of language, new perspectives in the queer community, new labels, uh, new perspectives on what's harmful or what maybe has moved away from being normalized because we've realized it's causing harm. Like we constantly need updates too about what's really happening in the world with people around us. So, as I wrap up my time here today, I just want to circle back. Who does the binary really serve? Who? It is not the men who are told to stay hard and emotionless. I have worked with those men as a therapist, as a coach, as a friend, as a lover. And there is nothing more amazing than witnessing a man reclaim his feelings and the depth of his emotions and bloom out of himself and become happier, healthier, more connected because he's finally allowed himself to access this emotional realm that society and often religion have tried to force out of him, that kept him feeling flat and depressed and like there's no point in life. So that magic of when they're like breaking free from the binary of I'm a man and I'm allowed to express. I don't have to be hard all the time. How much that shows you the real person in front of you, right? Before that, we're just being caricatures. The binary does not serve the women who were told to stay small, the women who have been force fed over and over and over again that, oh, that boys will be boys, that men will be men, right? Women who continue to put up with just absolute atrocities because we've been trained that that's normal. The binary does not serve those women. And the binary doesn't serve the children who were told that there was something wrong with them for wanting to explore something off the beaten path of what society immediately presented to them. I think about my training as a public school teacher and really dropping into some of the studies that were coming out in the early 2000s about how much rigid gender pushing there were in public schools, how statistically high it was that teachers would recommend quote unquote male career paths for boys and female career paths for girls. And I'm sure you can imagine, right? The boys are getting pushed towards the STEM, the math and engineering and the science careers and doctor work. And the girls are getting pushed towards being teachers and nurses and daycare providers and things like that. Boys being pushed towards quote unquote boy books and girls being pushed towards girl books. Like there were studies coming out about how this was showing up in our schools and how literally public education was shaping those gender roles and norms. And I have long sought to just encourage people to enjoy what they enjoy, explore what they want to explore, see what they want to see. The binary does not serve those children who that little boy who wants to play with a baby doll because he has a very strong nurturing side to him that if he continues to develop and learn and grow, someday he's going to be the world's most compassionate psychologist, right? Or that little girl who was really interested in cars and engineering and how engines run and could grow up to become a, and a woman who builds the next hyper efficient energy vehicle, right? Like when we try to limit people into these little boxes, they can't dream freely. And so that binary keeps us from dreaming freely. The binary serves only people who are afraid to ask what's on the other side of it. And so I just love, how Len said, no one can stop my happiness but me. And Harmony said, let it be, let us be, right? So I feel like there were probably a billion more things I wanted to say today. There's just so much to this. And I am just a person, I just love you. I love you as the person that you are. And I have had so many experiences, even in grad school. I will never forget in grad school to become a therapist. There was an older gentleman. He sat in front of me in one of my classes. And I think this was health and human development class. And one day he started talking about a non binary friend of his. And he was getting like red. He was getting really upset, very agitated. And he finally let it out. He was like, I'm just really bothered that I don't know what genitals they have. Me, I couldn't keep my mouth shut. And I was just like, why does it matter? Like, are you trying to hook up with your friend? Does it matter? What are we doing here? Why do we need to know the genitals that your friend has? he was just so bothered that he couldn't figure out which box to put them in. And I've been cracking up here recently because in in the world, I have seen this sort of joke going around like, are you boy non-binary or girl non-binary? And that is exactly what this guy was trying to do. He was like, okay, you identify as non-binary, but which binary are you? Like, oh man, it just I find it a little mind-boggling, a little frustrating, and yet, you know, with grace, we're here to learn here on Earth School, and this is one of those things that I guess just drives some of us up a wall because we've been programmed to believe that there are only two boxes. So I also give this man the grace of understanding that he grew up and he understood there's only two boxes. And this friend was probably the first time that someone in his life said, you know what, I don't agree with either of these boxes. I'm doing my own thing, my own expression over here. And that probably broke his brain open, as it does so many people, because there's nothing like seeing someone be freely themselves when you feel trapped to really make you question everything. So I think that's so much of what's happening in the world right now is because there are so many people who are starting to stand in the power of who they are, the systems that be, the powers that be that have existed out of rigidity are feeling really threatened. And we need scapegoats to distract from all of the more important things that are happening in the world that we could be paying attention to. Yeah. So I want to leave you here knowing that no law can reach inside of a person, and whatever happens in the legislation in the world, you can't be governed as your own expressed being, right? Inside your heart, inside your soul, you know who you are, and that is not a small thing. That's the whole thing. So, loving yourself regardless of the absolute BS out in the world is the work. And I think that that's the work for all of us, whether we are trans, non-binary, cis, questioning, whatever, is to really be in love with ourselves. That is the work, and to show up as our fully expressed selves again and again and again, even when it's hard, even when you fit some of the dominant systems, and those are okay. None of us really fit all of them, and that's the truth. So I just want you to remember that your soul is absolutely perfect and came here to express through you in your beautiful body temple. And what does it, look like when you don't stand in the truth of who you are? And what does it do for you when you do stand in the truth of who you are? What does it give you back when you are empowered, regardless of what that looks like for you? When you stand in your power, what is the ripple effect of that? Stand in that. And no, there is no binary other than the fact that spectrums have two ends. And sometimes we connect the two ends of the spectrum and we get a circle. That's true too. But most of us exist in gray area. We are not black and white. So give yourself grace, others grace, and let's keep encouraging each other to be truly who we are. Before I wrap up today, I just want to shout out again translegislation.com, the trevorproject.org, hrc.org, glad with two A's.org, and the Williams Institute. Those are all sources that you can go look further into the research. You can learn more how to get involved, how to help, because right here, right now, especially our trans youth, are going to need more of our love and more of our care when they are constantly being bombarded with a world that is trying to erase them in the legislation today, in what is allowed to be taught today, in just all of these culture wars that are trying to whitewash the beautiful diversity of our world. So celebrate someone in your world who is unique, who is being fully themselves. Celebrate yourself for standing in whatever aspects of your own journey and expression that you feel empowered to do so, and know that you can continue to expand that empowerment and step more and more into yourself each and every day. So I see you, I believe in you, and I'm cheering you on. Thanks for coming to my soapbox. And I really just love y'all so much. I'll be back here again sometime soon for another conversation. Until next time, this has been an episode of The Shadow Side. Bye for now.